Hi, so next we are going to talk about modern state management with Vue. I am Vanessa. I am responsible for the front-end implementations at a startup called Savvy. And in my spare time, I'm hosting or co-hosting the podcast Expect Exception, where we talk about front-end testing, and Working Draft, a German-speaking podcast about web development and web design. So in the next 20 minutes, I will show you alternative concepts, how to use Vue, but without the Options API and also without Vuex. I do not suggest that you in your project should use Vue free without Options API or also replace Vuex, but I have a special hint on my last slide for today when it comes to state management. Also, in my code examples, I use the setup function, and I also use ref instead of reactive. But everything what I show you today is replaceable by using the syntactic sugar for script setup, and you can also replace ref with reactive. I started to work with Vue free in September 2020 as it came out, and although I was a big fan for it, after a while when my problems got a bit more complex and therefore I also needed more complex solutions, I was starting to look for best practices. And therefore my talk today is also inspired by mainly those three articles. The one is Group Extract Share Pattern by Markus. Then there is State Management with Composition API by Philippe. And then there is Should You Use Composition API as a Replacement for Vuex by Anthony. Okay, let's have a quick recap on three of the APIs that Vue free is giving us nowadays. The one, we know it all, is the Options API with data, computed, methods, watch, mounted, and others. So the Reactivity API, which comes with Vue free, are the functions we can now use for reactive programming also outside of Vue single file components, like ref, reactive for reactive data, computed properties, watch and watch effect, of course also the lifecycle hooks on mounted and all of the others. And here the interesting part is that we can import those functions from Vue, also if we are in a plain JavaScript or TypeScript file. And to use these functions, we have the Composition API, which offers us this setup function where we can use all of the great tools of the Reactivity API. So let's have a recap on the Options API, how it looks like. So here I just have the template on top with a paragraph, with a greeting and a full name. On my script block of the component, I have reactive data for the greeting of hello. I have two properties for the first name and last name. And I have a computed property, which calculates the full name out of the first name and the last name and returns it as a string. And then we could have more methods, lifecycle hooks, etc. Also interesting is here that I don't actually change the greeting ever. I just needed a way to initialize this const, which is now a reactive data attribute, to have the hello in my file. And so I can print greeting, full name, so hello, first name, last name. Then there is one problem with the Options API I personally had, and that is that logical units are spread over the whole script block. So, of course, we need to keep our components as small as possible, so they also have like the single purpose they deliver. But the more complex the problem is, the more complex my component will get, and I cannot split it down further. And although at a lot of components, I don't really have functionality I need to share. And the Composition API was always like kind of sold to me, like, yeah, use this instead of mixins. But there's more to it. So I like to use the Composition API because the Options API with the computed and data and props, the structure of this object skeleton, it categorizes by computed props, by methods. And with the Composition API, I'm more free with that. So looking at these pictures, which underline what I just said, we have our logical units with the Options API on the left-hand side are spread all over the file. And with the Composition API, we can really bind these logical units together if they belong together and make it visible. And therefore, components will be easier to maintain to refactor or also to overlook anything in pull requests. So the composition API enables developers to encapsulate logical units in one single file or shared with others. And here I have some examples using the Vue single file component playground. So in the hello world, which is now shown here, I do nothing else than in the component we just looked at. I have a greeting and full name. I have the properties here, and I have the setup function. As said, of course, you can do this with script setup as well. And what I do have here is my const greeting of hello and a const full name, which is a computed property of first name and last name, and I return it to have it available in my template. What's nice here is that greeting is just a const, and for me, the nice thing here is this does just look like plain JavaScript with maybe a little bit of a weird inner error function here. But I really like that I can simply read it one line after the other, and I'm not in this options API block. When I switch to Hello World 2, I do a couple of things more. Let me just switch here also to Hello World 2 so you can see what's going on. So here, instead of only my greeting, I have also items. For the record, of course, it would have been possible to split this up into components, but for the sake of having now the simple example, I decided to put all of those in one single component. So here on top, I have the similar template, but I also have a list with list items of my items with account, and I have also a button to delete these items. Okay, scrolling down, so I have this, I import now computed and ref. And scrolling down to the setup function, I have the greeting with hello and then my full name computed property as before. And I have my list of items, and I have the function to delete the item. And here I added the comment for warning, don't fill back in the old order, because as I started with Vue 3, I constantly did things like this, that I put my items also to the top, because I, just as muscle memory, I sorted it from data, computer to methods until I realized, no, I don't have to do this anymore. I can now order by logical units. And what I mean with that gets a bit more clear in the Hello World 3. So let's say my composition, my setup function gets already a bit crowded. So what can I do here? If I scroll down already, to the setup block, what you can see here now is that it's a bit less content in here. So I have the const greeting and full name, which comes from a composable called use greeting, where I pass my props into. And I have the const items and delete item coming from a composable for use items. And now I return everything to have it available in the template. Would be even smaller in a script setup block. So if I scroll down on top of my script block again, I can see here that I just excluded the logic which belonged together, the greeting and full name to one composable, and the items and the function to delete the item in one composable, to have them just separated and have my logical units and don't have a crowded setup function. And now coming to the last part, and just so you will see that it's still working, I will also switch here to Hello World 4, which has no differences for the user, but we have refactored a bit further. So let's say the items are something that I want to reuse for more and more components. So what I now actually did was to create a real composable, so a JavaScript file outside of the single file components, which I also have open here. So I have the used items, the same functionality as we just seen before. I just import ref from Vue in my JavaScript file. I export this function where I have my items inside, and the delete item function, which I return to have it available in my component. And here I still have my internal use greeting composable, and in the setup function I still have greeting and full name from use greeting, and I also use the use items. Here is one example of something that I did in the beginning and what I don't like to do anymore. So I used the JavaScript destructuring, ECMAScript destructuring to make it shorter, because I thought, yeah, less code, better code. And I used .. use items. My problem with that approach was, as I scroll down into the template, and it was like, you know, after months or weeks or only days, I was like, yeah, what is the deleted item actually doing? Where is it coming from? And as I was only using the use items, there was no way to see where delete item is actually coming from. And for this reason, I like to have it more explicit, to just say, okay, const items and delete item is coming from this composable instead of using the ECMAScript destructuring. Okay, so far so good, but we wanted to talk a bit more about state management. Just one more hint, if you are now interested in how composables can be written or what's already out there, I can encourage you to go to VueUse, which is a Git repository, which already has a lot of nice, really nice composables. Okay, state management in Vue. So in Vue 2, and I know that there was a tweet that I sent out in somewhere in 2017, where I was like, oh my gosh, I already was in love with Vue, but my components got a bit bigger and more complex, and I found out there's a thing called Vuex, and it's the best thing ever, and I'm now really in love with Vue. And that was really the case. I think Vuex was always very easy to start with. Everything with Vue was always simple to start with, so we don't have to learn too much of the framework, but really can concentrate on the complex problems which we need to solve with complex code, but the framework itself wasn't complex. So first, of course, I did the error I assume some other people also had done like me. I had something called this prop drilling, where I had props from grandparents to grandchildren, and emit events just up again. Then I tried a weird workaround with trying to attach something on global root, which also didn't work. And then I started after 2 weeks, where I was very frustrated. Okay, I think I need this state management now, and it sounds complicated, but I will use Vuex now. And from the beginning, I did like it a lot. There were some best practices missing at some companies or projects I worked with, like, do we use map state, map getters? Do we say explicitly store.state? Do we always use getters or only state? And so on and so forth. But under the hood, this is a really great framework. So the thing is that I started with Vue 3. And when I started with Vue 3, I read the docs. And what I saw there was also a section about simple state management from scratch. So I checked this out, and what I can see here on this page, everything is linked in the slides. You can also read it if you have a minute later. There are some examples how to do, without Vuex, a bit of state management. And with that I thought, okay, I think with this composition API and reactivity API we do now have in Vue 3, I think it's more powerful than just to share functionalities between components. I think I can actually have my state in there now. And at the end, they also say, okay, but maybe check out Vuex now. But I was hooked at this point. And the clue here was like having the state as just a reactive object. So I thought, okay, let's try this out. I want to know how it works, or if it works. And what I did next was to create local and global state management with composables. So let me load the code sandbox here. And what we will see now is a app.vue. And we have a bit more of a realistic items handling than before, where we actually also fetch something, not from a server, but I have a loading state in there. So I have a sleep timer for 3 seconds. And we actually afterwards only save it in the local array we have. So here's my app.vue. And I increase the screen as much as I can still see by myself anything. Okay, so the app.vue, right now I'm only showing a component called cart items. And in my cart items, which are here, I have this template I see also on the right. And I have my script part, where I import computed, unmounted, and ref. Here is the use sleep, which behaves like I would fetch something actually from an API endpoint. And then I have here my state, where I have a ref with items and is loading. I have a function to set the items, I have a function to load the items, I have a function to delete the item. I also have a computed property for the first item, but you can see here you need to buy X next. And on the mounted lifecycle hook, I load the items. So if I reload once again, you can see this loading state for 3 seconds, and then my items are there. And then I can also delete the X. But now I want this functionality also in several components. So what I will show you next is the cart items alternative and the favorites. So let me switch these states here so I can only see the other 2 components. And then I hit save. And on the cart items alternative, you can see a similar implementation, but let me make this smaller. But I have the state load items first item and delete item coming from a composable called use items. And on mounted, I load the items. And the same does happen on the favorites, where I use the same use items composable for state load items first item, delete items. So I can see here, these are the cart items of the cart items alternative component and the favorite items out of the favorites component. And now here's a clue. If I delete the X from the cart items, they still stay in the favorites, which might make sense from a UX perspective because I might just want to keep my favorites forever. But let's check out why this is the case actually. So I go to the composables, into the use items composable. And now I can see here that I import computed ref and read only from Vue. I have my sleep timer and I have dummy items, the eggs and the milk. And I have inside of the function use items, which I export, inside of that I do have the state for the ref with items and is loading and the same functions we just saw beforehand. And a small clue here is very important for state management is that it's a single source of truth, right? And that you cannot just manipulate it from everywhere or mutate it. So here I use the read-only keyword of Vue to make it actually like read-only, and I cannot change it from the outside where I import this state. It's very similar if you would have used, or if I would have used a computed property instead. But now you know that there is a read-only statement. Okay, so what do I need to do now if I want to have it like a real store, like a global store? Like I want also the fresh milk to be deleted if I delete it down there. And I only have to change one minor thing. So the const state, which I export every single time or initialize every single time from scratch if I import this function somewhere. But what I will do next is to move the state outside of this function. So it behaves a bit more like a singleton or like a single object, which has only one state. And if I go now here and delete the fresh milk from the favorites, they are deleted globally. So in 5 minutes, we had local state management and global state management only with the composition API. And I was really in love with this feature just because it was working. There's an alternative concept. If you now say, yeah, cool, but I already have like Vuex, and what do I do now? I have the store.js files, and I want to keep my store.js files. Then we can use provide inject of Vue. Let me also show this example in the other code sandbox. And here I have one app.vue, and I will have a hello world component, and I will have a child component. And in addition to this, I have a store. So let me check out the app.vue, where I import a store from the store. I import a hello world component, and I provide the store. That's everything that happens here. The store itself is like Vuex looking like store index.js, where I have my state as a ref with items is loading and the same functions we saw beforehand. And just because I was used to do this, like as when I was writing Vuex stores, is that I used this uppercase syntax for actions, mutations. Here it's kind of the same. But the functionality stays the same here. And I export the state, I export the getters and setters, so to say. Here in the Hello World component, which is a component which I include in app.vue, nothing is happening. There's no store, there's nothing. There's only the child1. And the child1 is actually now this template I can see on the right, where I can now delete my items. And to show you that this is again a global state, I will just import the child1 twice. And if I reload the code sandbox, you will see the same component twice. And if I click on one of those, like for example the milk, it will be deleted for both of them. As soon as code sandbox was loading, I think it's a bit annoyed by my MacBook here, recording the screen, recording my voice, recording the webcam and trying to make code sandbox work. But here's the store with composition API with the inject provide pattern. Okay, so this should have given you the example that you can use that you can have state management in Vue 3 out of the box with reactive and ref data. If you will ask me now for a personal opinion what I would use Pinya and talk to the author. Why? Because I'm out of time now. Thank you all for listening and I'm here for your questions.